We've seen quite significant pressure on the Russian economy. I mean, obviously, look, Russia has had a lot of money, squirreled away for an event like this, and they've done a reasonable job protecting the currency and it's smoothing some of the losses for Russian consumers.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has been at an economic forum today and slammed what he called sanctions fever by Western governments. He defended the invasion of Ukraine. He said Europeans could freeze without Russian energy exports. And he said Russia hadn't lost anything from the sanctions put in by the West. Well, joining me now is Professor Samuel Greene, director of the Russian Institute at King's College London. Hi, Samuel. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now, this is quite an intriguing statement here. So Putin says that Russia has not lost anything from sanctions put in by the West. That's not true, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, we've seen quite significant pressure on the Russian economy. I mean, obviously, look, Russia has had a lot of money, squirreled away for an event like this, and they've done a reasonable job protecting the currency and it's smoothing some of the losses for Russian consumers. But we've seen, quite significant, downgrading and essentially, Russians' quality of life in terms of what they can consume, the access they have to global markets. Automobile sales, home sales, even general sort of high tech and white good sales in the Russian economy have plummeted. Russians are paying much more for foodstuffs and for energy themselves.
The G7 has planned this price cap on Russian oil, but Putin says he simply will not sell to those countries. So how do you think a price cap will work?
Well, I think to a certain extent, I leave that to the economists. The idea, of course, is to make it possible, at least in theory, for Russian hydrocarbons, of which there are quite a number, obviously, to flow into Western markets while not providing those excess profits to fuel the Russian war machine. I think that policymakers in the West are aware of the fact that they are going to have to make do with less Russian oil and gas, and in fact, that's a strategic transition that the West had been trying to make for some time. So, if anything, this just speeds things up.
Sam, there is a suggestion that this agreement between Russia and Ukraine to get grain out of Ukrainian ports into the Black Sea is under threat tonight. But Russia actually has some skin in the game here, doesn't it? Because the grain often goes to Africa, of which Putin wants to support many of those governments.
Yes, I think it is, having allowed that grain to flow. I think that to a certain extent, Putin has painted himself into a corner. He was trying, in fact, to use the lack of Ukrainian exports to markets in the global South as a way of building support, in fact, for his war and of undermining support for Ukraine and the West. Now that grain is flowing, of course, if it stops again, it will be quite clear who's to blame.
Now, regardless of what happens with this proposed cap that's been spoken about this week with the G7, the European Union's sixth sanctions package is set to ban all Russian crude oil imports by sea, just talking about the grain there, into the bloc starting in December this year. And then all refined oil products such as gasoline, diesel and fuel oil starting in February next year. So there is a winding down of European Union imports, but how much of those imports are going to be going over to Asia instead, to economies who are thinking, well, I can get some cheaper fuel from Russia?
Well, a certain amount of it will, quite a bit of it will, obviously, particularly refined products, other things that don't have to flow through pipelines. It is possible, for Russia to find markets elsewhere in the world. It is a globalized market. Of course, the reality is that the Chinese or anybody else who might be buying these exports from Russia will be aware that Russia has limited options in terms of where to sell them, and of course, will be able to buy them at a significant discount as well. So Russia will get less money for its exports than it would have otherwise.
And Putin's set to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Uzbekistan next week. Do you think that these sanctions imposed by the West have made the Chinese and Russian relationship stronger?
Well, they have to an extent, but of course that's been a trend that's been going for a long time, right? Russia, look, it's located next to China. It's going to trade and do business with China in any circumstance. What this really has done has been to shift the terms of that relationship. It's really increased China's leverage over Moscow itself. It's made it possible for China to drive a much harder bargain with Russia when it comes to things like importing Russian commodities, hydrocarbons, forestry, and metals and that sort of thing. But also, in terms of winning Russia's geopolitical loyalty. China
Mm.
has a lot of things itself it would like to achieve in Central Asia, in Asia Pacific, in Africa, things that Russia in the past has not always been very happy with. But right now, really can't afford to challenge China on.
Sam, a pleasure to speak with you. Sam Greene, the director of the Russian Institute at King's College London. It's 20.